back on this side of the door. Because the game of hide-and-seek was still going on, it took Edmund and Lucy some time to find the others. But when at last they were all together, which happened in the long room where the suit of armor was, Lucy burst out. "Peter, Susan, it's all true. Edmund has seen it too. There is a country you can get to through the wardrobe. Edmund and I both got in. We met one another in there, in the wood. Go on, Edmund, tell them all about it." "What's all this about, Ed?" said Peter. And now we come to one of the nastiest things in this story. Up to that moment, Edmund had been feeling sick and sulky and annoyed with Lucy for being right, but he hadn't made up his mind what to do. When Peter suddenly asked him the question, he decided all at once to do the meanest and most spiteful thing he could think of. He decided to let Lucy down. "Tell us, Ed," said Susan. And Edmund gave a very superior look as if he were far older than Lucy. There were really only a year's difference. And then a little snigger, and he said, "Oh yes, Lucy and I have been playing, pretending that all her story about a country in the wardrobe is true. Just for fun, of course. There's nothing there, really." Poor Lucy gave Edmund one look and rushed out of the room. Edmund, who was becoming a nastier person every minute, thought that he had scored a great success and went on once to say, "There she goes again. What's the matter with her? That's the worst of young kids. They always—" "Look here," said Peter, turning on him savagely. "Shut up. You've been perfectly beastly to Lou ever since she started this nonsense about the wardrobe, and now you go playing games with her about it and setting her off again. I believe you did it simply out of spite." "But it's all nonsense," said Edmund, very taken aback. "Of course it's all nonsense," said Peter. "That's just the point. Lou was perfectly all right when we left home, but since we've been down here, she seems to be either going queer in the head or else turning into a most frightful liar. But whichever it is, what good do you think you'll do by jeering and nagging at her one day and encouraging her the next?" I thought, said Edmund, but he couldn't think of anything to say. "You didn't think anything at all," said Peter. "It's just spite. You've always liked being beastly to anyone smaller than yourself. We've seen that at school before now." "Do stop it," said Susan. "It won't make things any better having a row between you two. Let's go and find Lucy." It was not surprising that when they found Lucy, a good deal later, everyone could see that she had been crying. Nothing they could say to her made any difference. She stuck to her story and said, "I don't care what you think, and I don't care what you say. You can tell the professor, or you can write to Mother, or you can do anything you like. I know I've met a fawn in there, and I wish I'd stayed there, and you are all beasts, beasts." It was an unpleasant evening. Lucy was miserable, and Edmund was beginning to feel that his plan wasn't working as well as he had expected. The two older ones were really beginning to think that Lucy was out of her mind. They stood in the passage talking about it in whispers long after she had gone to bed. The result was the next morning they decided that they really would go and tell the whole thing to the professor. "He'll write to Father if he thinks there is really something wrong with Lou," said Peter. "It's getting beyond us." So they went and knocked at the study door, and the professor said, "Come in," and got up and found chairs for them and said he was quite at their disposal. Then he sat listening to them with the tips of his fingers pressed together and never interrupting till they had finished the whole story. After they had said nothing for quite a long time, then he cleared his throat and said the last thing either of them expected. "How do you know," he asked, "that your sister's story is not true?" "Oh, but," began Susan and then stopped. Anyone could see from the old man's face that he was perfectly serious. Then Susan pulled herself together and said, "But Edmund said that they had only been pretending." "That is a point," said the professor, "which certainly deserves consideration, very careful consideration. For instance, if you'll excuse me for asking the question, does your experience lead you to regard your brother or your sister as the more reliable? I mean, which is the more truthful?" "That's just the funny thing about it, sir," said Peter. "Up till now, I'd have said Lucy every time." "And what do you think, my dear?" said the professor, turning to Susan. "Well," said Susan, "in general I'd say the same as Peter. But this couldn't be true, all this about the wood and the fawn." "That is more than I know," said the professor, "and a charge of lying against someone whom you have always found truthful is a very serious thing indeed." "We were afraid it might even be lying," said Susan. "We thought there might be something wrong with Lucy." "Madness, you mean?" said the professor quite coolly. "Oh, you can make your minds easy about that. One has only to look at her and talk to her to see that she is not mad." "But then," said Susan, and stopped. She had never dreamed that a grown-up would talk like the professor and didn't know what to think. "Logic," said the professor half to himself. "Why don't they teach logic at these schools? There are only three possibilities. Either your sister is telling lies, or she is mad, or she is telling the truth. You know she doesn't tell lies, and it is obvious that she is not mad. For the moment then, and unless any further evidence turns up, we must assume she is telling the truth." Susan looked at him very hard and was quite sure from the expression on his face that he was not making fun of them. "But how could it be true, sir?" said Peter. "Why do you say that?" asked the professor. "Well, for one thing," said Peter, "if it was true, why doesn't everyone find this country every time they go to the wardrobe? I mean, there was nothing there when we looked. Even Lucy didn't pretend there was." "What has that to do with it?" said the professor. "Well, sir, if things are real, then they're there all the time." "Are they?" said the professor. And Peter didn't know quite what to say. "But there was no time," said Susan. "Lucy had no time to have gone anywhere, even if there was such a place. She came running after us the very moment we were out of the room. It was less than a minute, and she pretended to have been away for hours." "That is the very thing that makes her story so likely to be true," said the professor. "If there really a door in this house that leads to some other world, and I should warn you that this is a very strange house, and even I know very little about it. If, I say, she had got into another world, I should not be at all surprised to find that the other world had a separate time of its own, so that however long you stay there, it would never take up any of our time. On the other hand, I don't think many girls of her age would invent that idea by themselves. If she had been pretending, she would have hidden for a reasonable time before coming out and telling her story." "But do you really mean, sir," said Peter, "that there could be another worlds? All over the place, just around the corner, like that?" "Nothing is more probable," said the professor, taking off his spectacles and beginning to polish them, while he muttered to himself, "I wonder what they do teach them at these schools." What are we to do?" said Susan. She felt that the conversation was beginning to get off the point. "My dear young lady," said the professor, suddenly looking up with a very sharp expression at both of them, "there is one plan which no one has yet suggested, and which is well worth trying." "What's that?" said Susan. "We might all try minding our own business," said he, and that was the end of the conversation. After this, things were a good deal better for Lucy. Peter saw to it that Edmund stopped jeering at her, and neither she nor anyone else felt inclined to talk about the wardrobe at all. It had become a rather alarming subject, and so for a time it looked as if all the adventures were coming to an end. But that was not to be. This house of the professor's, which even he knew so little about, was so old and famous that people from all over England used to come and ask permission to see over it. It was the sort of house that is mentioned in guidebooks and even in histories. And well it might be, for all manner of stories were told about it, some of them even stranger than the one I am telling you now. And when parties of sightseers arrived and asked to see the house, the professor always gave them permission, and Mrs. Macready, the housekeeper, showed them round, telling them about the pictures and the armor and the rare books in the library. Mrs. Macready was not fond of children and did not like to be interrupted when she was telling visitors all the things she knew. She had said to Susan and Peter almost on the first morning, along with a good many other instructions, "And please remember you're to keep out of the way whenever I'm taking a party over the house." "Just as if any of us would want to waste half the morning trailing around with a crowd of strange grown-ups," said Edmund, and he and the other three thought the same. That was how the adventure began for the second time. A few mornings later, Peter and Edmund were looking at the suit of armor and wondering if they could take it to bits, when the two girls rushed into the room and said, "Look out! Here comes the Macready and a whole gang with her." "Sharp's the word," said Peter, and all four made off through the door at the far end of the room. But when they had got out into the green room and beyond it, into the library, they suddenly heard voices ahead of them, and realized that Mrs. Macready must be bringing her party of sightseers up the back stairs, instead of up the front stairs as they had expected. Whether it was that they lost their heads, or that Mrs. Macready was trying to catch them, or that some magic in the house had come to life and was chasing them into Narnia, they seemed to find themselves being followed everywhere, until at last Susan said, "Oh, bother those trippers! Here, let's go into the wardrobe room till they've passed. No one will follow us in there." But the moment they were inside, they heard the voices in the passage, and then someone fumbling at the door, and they saw the handle turning. "Quick," said Peter, "there's nowhere else," and flung open the wardrobe. All four of them bundled inside and sat there panting in the dark. Peter held the door closed but did not shut it, for, of course, he remembered, as every sensible person does, that you should never, never shut yourself in to a wardrobe.
Well, good evening, everyone. I hope you all are doing well on this what is a beautiful Thursday night here in Columbus, Ohio. I don't know, depending on where you are, you may be dealing with, it would seem, a Category 4 hurricane if you're down in Florida or in Georgia, in that area, Alabama area. Know that you all are in my prayers if you're down there. I know we have quite a few that listen from that area. So know that you guys are in my prayers at this moment with all that's going on, all that's happening around us. Yeah, I know it can be nerve-wracking. I was thinking back. I lived in Florida. I'm not sure I remember being there during a hurricane. I remember hurricane seasons and the rest and some of the storms that would come through. We were there for about 3 years back when I was a child, but I do remember feeling the worry that would come from that. So just know that if you're in those areas, I'm grateful that you're here. I hope it will pass through quickly and with very little damage, and especially loss of life. That's my prayer this evening. But I'm grateful that you're here from wherever you're tuning in, from all over the United States or all over the world. I know we've got people from all sorts of different walks of life, including all over the globe. Each and every week, I'm always surprised by the people who send me a message and let me know that they're watching or that they tuned in after the fact or whatever it may be. I am grateful, as always, for your presence. Without further ado, let's dive into chapter 5. I'm very excited about this chapter. There's not a ton of things here, especially without becoming repetitive, especially as we're getting more and more into the story. And the further we go into the story, the more it gets into the richness and the depth of some of the complicated context of the storyline itself and the analogies and the rest. But tonight, in a way, it's kind of a carryover from last week. And so I've got a few extra thoughts I want to add this week as we dive into this wonderful, wonderful chapter. So it's back on this side of the door. So because the game of hide and seek was still going on, it took Edmund and Lucy some time to find the others. But when at last they were all together, which happened in the long room where the suit of armor was, Lucy burst out. "Peter, Susan, it's all true. Edmund has seen it too. There is a country you can get into through the wardrobe. Edmund and I both got in. We met one another there in the wood. Go on, Edmund. Tell them all about it." And then Peter kind of looks at him and says, "All right, what is this all about? Is this really true?" And from there, you kind of know what happens in that he hadn't really decided. And I do love how Lewis kind of plays up to this thing because he says, now, this is one of the nastiest things that's going to happen in this story is this, in essence, this lie that he is about to tell that he didn't actually go into Narnia at all. And Edmund gave a very superior look, as if it's far older than Lucy. And this is one of those things that children tend to do, especially when they're trying to play up around another or make the other feel better or worse about themselves. That there's just this way in which you kind of claim an error that you're somehow better. And if we can be honest, this isn't something that just children do. This is something that happens all the time with adults too, where we tell either half-truths or in this case a full lie specifically because he's wanting to seem like he's better off than his sister and the rest. And he says, "Oh yes, Lucy and I have been playing," pretending that all her story about a country in the wardrobe is true, just for fun, of course. There's nothing there really. And then, without even much of a thing, poor Lucy gave Edmund one look and rushed out of the room. Just rushed out of the room as fast as possible. And we talked about this in previous weeks, this concept of how do you deal with lying? How do you deal with liars? Or how do you deal with also false statements? Because it's not that just that he lied here. He specifically also gave a false witness, which is one of the 10 Commandments, that he bore false witness against Lucy, specifically basically claiming something that was not true about her, that she was somehow making it up. In fact, it was just all in their imagination. He was just playing along with her delusion, in essence, from there. So we've talked a little bit about that, but I wanted to specifically note how often these half-truths or even straight lies, where we try to make ourselves look better, or when we get caught in something, we don't want to just admit what we know to be true and what we know to be false. And so in Proverbs 10:12, it specifically says, "Hatred stirs up conflict, but love covers over all wrongs." Leviticus 19:18, "Do not seek revenge or bear a grudge against anyone among your people, but love your neighbor as yourself. I am the Lord." Ephesians 4:31-32 says, "Get rid of all bitterness, rage, and anger, brawling and slander, along with every form of malice. Be kind and compassionate to one another, forgiving each other, just as in Christ God forgave you." Hebrews 12:15 says, "See to it that no one falls short of the grace of God, and that no bitter root grows up to cause trouble and defile many." Now, the reason I brought up all these verses is because of how easy it is for us to, when a moment like this would happen, for Lucy to grow bitter and angry, and for this process to build. And I can just be honest with you, there's been a few situations in my life where bitterness and anger can have built up over time, especially with how certain individuals at times have treated me. And I don't think this is unique to me. I think all of us go through it at some point in time in our lives, that all of us have been wronged by someone, or someone has misspoken or even purposefully lied about us in some form or fashion. And I think it's a sad reality of human nature that we do this at times to one another, where we seek to destroy instead of build up. And then that animosity sets in and that frustration sets in. And it's really hard to get over. it's really hard to get over. And just as much as the scriptures speak about repentance and change, we talked about that quite a bit in the previous chapters, also here is don't let those things become bitterness and anger within you. Even when you've been wrong or been wronged in this capacity, forgiveness is the first call. Forgiveness is the first aspect that we are called to find, to not let it seep in, because bitterness and anger changes us. It alters our mindset, and we can become very negative people. And I'll just be honest with you, in ministry in and of itself, this is a tough one, because at times I tell people all the time, I often see people on their worst day and on their best days. And all the days in between are days where they're trying to grow. But those worst days, when everything's at its end, or in moments where there's pain and suffering, or where there's moments where everything has gone wrong, or they've been wronged by someone, and it's so easy for people to then just live in that pain and to wallow in it. And we live in a culture of victimization where, in fact, to be a victim in some ways is seen as a good thing, because then someone owes you something. Someone you are owed something from culture, from life in general. And so a culture of victims has been created in essence. And there's a lot of people, even in faith and Christianity, who live out their days constantly just living and wallowing in their pain and misery, not wanting to forgive, not wanting to forget, not realizing how their heart has been changed over and over again by those situations from the past. So Edmund, who was becoming a nastier person every minute, thought he had scored a great success. And then he actually does what's a lot of people, there she goes again. What's the matter with her? That's the worst of these young kids these days. He's suddenly playing to airs, playing that he's better, he knows something better. And look here, said Peter, turning on him savagely. Shut up. You've been perfectly beastly to Lou. And he goes back and then he says, but it's all nonsense. So prior to this, he speaks about this idea, oh, we were just kind of making it up, we were playing our game and everything. But he says now it's all nonsense. Very taken aback that they do not believe him. Now, if you look back, and in fact, even if you look forward later on, you'll find out that they tend to believe Lucy historically more than they do Edmund. Edmund's known to make up and fabricate lies along the way. And so it's fascinating that even with this, Peter gets upset at Edmund. It's like, just stop it. Just knock it off. Even if it was that, just knock it off. You're just causing anger and strife. You're just stirring up problems. And there are so many moments in life where I wish we could just tell individuals just go, just let it go. Just stop. Whether you're right or wrong, all you're doing is creating more conflict and more division and more issues. Just let it go. And if I could be honest with you, so often on social media and the rest, and a lot of these places, I just see people who stir things up nonstop just to get a rise out of people. Just a little while, I guess it was a few weeks ago, there was an article that came out that was basically a survey from lots of preachers. I think it was in the Christian Chronicle about the invitation, whether or not churches are offered the invitation or not. And I felt like it was a fairly balanced article. It just gave people's opinions, that some people felt like it was still necessary. Other people said, no, we don't do it anymore, or we only do it on certain occasions. We always, when we teach the Bible classes, we make sure people know about baptism and those things. But we just don't do it at the end of sermons. And I've said there's been a lot of times when I preach where, I'll be honest with you, it doesn't lend itself, where the teaching on that day does not lend itself to this concept of an invitation. So it always feels like there's a little add-on at the end of the sermon that doesn't necessarily fit with the rest of it. Now, that's a little bit different than how some people have taken it. In fact, from there, we had a lot of people started writing articles about how not having the invitation at the end of every sermon was somehow sinful. And then we had people on the other side saying, look, to add in the invitation at all is not necessary at all. In fact, if you do that, then it's problematic. So we had these people take these sides. And the reality is, if they would just stop in a moment and go, look, for whatever you can, in whatever situation you are, do your best to teach and preach the fullness of God in all situations. Instead of just seeing the wisdom and just backing away from it, we had article after article and other things. And some of them were really well-written articles, and they made some great arguments in the rest. But the premise of it, though, was bound on just causing the conversation to keep going, and it became so divisive. If there wasn't that situation, that moment, then somebody might have, 6 months from now, if somebody had sat down and written, I'd been like, wow, that's a really good article. But instead, you could tell that it was brought about by just something that didn't ultimately matter. And even as I'm saying that, I know that there may be some who'll go, no, but it does matter. But in the big picture of things, we often get so caught up on these small things that we miss the big picture. We miss the forest for the trees. And so Peter, of course, agrees with him and says, of course it's all nonsense. That's just the point. Lou was perfectly all right when we left home. But since we've been down here, we've started quite a problem. And you'll be jeering and nagging her. And then Edmund kind of catches himself not really knowing what to say. You didn't think at all, said Peter. It's just spite. You're always like being beastly to anyone smaller than yourself. We've seen it at school before now. So obviously we learned a little bit about Edmund's character prior to their arrival in this moment. Do stop it, said Susan. Let's go and find Lucy. It's not surprising when they found Lucy. A good deal later, everyone could see that she had been crying. Nothing they could say to do her to make any difference. She stuck to her story and said, I don't care what you think and I don't care what you say. You can tell the professor or write to Mother or you can do anything you like. I know I've met a fawn in there, and I wish I'd stayed there because you are all beasts. Beasts! Ooh, it's getting chippy in the Pensieve family, the family home here. So it was an unpleasant evening. I do love that Lewis kind of have these moments where I go, yes, this was probably a very unpleasant evening. It was an unpleasant evening. Lucy was miserable, and Edmund was beginning to feel that his plan wasn't working as well as he had expected. The two older ones were really beginning to think that Lucy was out of her mind. They stood in the passage talking about it in whispers long after she'd gone to bed. So they come down to this concept of, well, we'll write to Father, or maybe we should talk to the professor. And the professor says, sure, and they come on into the professor's study. And one of the things that I love is this first question that he asks. He says, how do you know, he asks, that your sister's story is not true? Now, this is a fascinating thing because anytime you would have, that if we had heard such a story in such a way, our first response might be, well, what do you mean not true? I mean, how could it be true? But he asks what would be considered a logical question. How do you know that your sister's story is not true? So how do you decide what is true and what is not? How do you go about that? And this is kind of the question for you all tonight to spend some time on. How do you decide what is true and what is not? Now, we live in a world that loves to toss around so many crazy words, and I grow so weary of these words, and I'm sure you do too in some way. The concept of misinformation or disinformation. And you might ask yourself, well, what are the differences between the two? Misinformation is this idea of information that's not true. Disinformation is stuff that's not true specifically to alter the truth. And boy, do we see this in our culture today. We see this over and over again about statements that are taken out of context. We see all sorts of things that people do, especially in our political world, where they try to alter the truth or change the truth. And this is not a one-sided thing. This is something that happens in both political parties. I'll be honest with you. It does seem like the people who scream misinformation or disinformation the most, as in they see everything against them as being that, tend to be the ones who also do it quite often. And so in the same way where I could say that I do believe like former President Trump has been very misinterpreted over and over on purpose, there are others in the same way where I think some of the counterpoints towards some of his arguments have also been altered in different formats. And so I don't think it's a one-sided narrative here. I think it's just something where we don't even go back to what is the truth? What is it true or not? Is this true or not? And so he starts off with the question, which was, that is your sister's story, true or not? So do you think about truth at all in this scenario? Or do you always just try to find the answer to what you already believe? This is what, sadly, I found so many of my friends do online. Is y'all don't realize how easy it is to go to a Google search and write a question in a way where you will get the answer that you want. Because we assume that we're going to get good information no matter what from our Google searches. One of the reasons why I've really come to enjoy a platform called X, or Twitter as what it used to be known, is that in and of itself, there is a lot of information out there where you can find firsthand accounts that tend to pop up before they get itemized away in a Google search and the rest. And so I found a lot of things on there that I was frankly surprised, both from the political arena or also different discussions on theology and philosophy. And it got me asking this question, especially as a philosopher, do we even think about what is true or not? Or are we just trying to decide whether or not what is being stated agrees with what we already believe? So they continue on, and she says, oh, but, and begins to, and then stops. Anyone could see from the old man's face that he was perfectly serious when he asked about this. And then she says, but Edmund said that he had only been pretending. And he says that is a point, which certainly deserves consideration, very careful consideration. For instance, if you'll excuse me for asking the question, does your experience lead you to regard your brother or your sister as more reliable? I mean, what is the more truthful? Well, that's just the funny thing about it, sir. Up until now, I've said Lucy every time. And what do you think, my dear? Well, in general, I'd say the same as Peter, but this couldn't be true, all this about the wood and the fawn. Now notice he's got them asking individual questions about things. Who do you trust? Who of the two has been more truthful in their life than the rest? And that is a consideration. And so when you look at what is true and what is not, you might want to take those things into account. As an example, just from our political world today, I always ask people, when people say President Trump said this or Vice President Kamala Harris said this, I often wonder if what you're repeating is what you heard or what they actually said. Far too often I've seen what people think certain people have said, but it's not what they actually said. It's what people have repeated about what they said. And there's a difference between the two. And he says, that is more than I know, and a charge of lying against someone whom you have always found truthful is a very serious thing indeed. We were afraid it mightn't even be lying. We thought there might be something wrong with Lucy. Madness, you mean? Said the professor. Oh, you can make your minds easy about that one. One has only looked at her and talked to her to see that she is not mad. Now, there is a fascinating thing here because he's going to go into this concept of madness. And in fact, Lewis, in another one of his books, actually writes this whole concept about Jesus. He will ask these three different questions, this concept of logic and reason. And he will say, either it is this, or this. There's only three options. And when it comes to Jesus, they specifically noted there are three things about him. He's either liar, lunatic, or Lord. He's either exactly who he said he is, or he lied about who he said he is, or he was crazy. Those are the three options. But specifically, you can't make Jesus to be something besides those three things. He couldn't have been just a good teacher while also making the claims to be God the way that he did. Either he was a liar, a lunatic, or Lord. And so this three-part of logic and reason that he's going to set forth is something that's going to play a part into this consideration. And specifically around the concept of wisdom. Truth and wisdom have always gone hand in hand. Yet, for whatever reason, we think that knowledge somehow equates to wisdom. There are a lot of people that know a lot of things, but they're functionally morons. They're functionally and culturally, they do not have a connection to reality. They are deceivers. They alter things. They alter the truth through clever words or phrasings. It's how Satan has used all of his lies from the very beginning. In Proverbs 3:13-14, it says, blessed are those who find wisdom, those who gain understanding, for she is more profitable than silver and yields better returns than gold. Now notice, wisdom, those who gain understanding. It's not just knowledge. You see, we've been given access to knowledge through the internet and through the things at the touch of a finger, where we haven't had to learn a lot. We can just look it up very quickly, but that's information. It's not understanding. There's a difference between the two. James 1:5, if any of you lacks wisdom, you should ask God, who gives generously to all without finding fault, and it will be given to you. To ask for wisdom, not just knowledge, not just information, but actual wisdom. Proverbs 4:7, the beginning of wisdom is this: get wisdom. Though it cost all you have, get understanding. Wisdom and understanding is different than just knowledge. Ecclesiastes 7:12, wisdom is a shelter as money is a shelter. But the advantage of knowledge is this: wisdom preserves those who have it. To be around those who are wise versus those who simply know things. There's a difference between the two. But then, said Susan, and stopped. She had never dreamed that a grown-up would talk like the professor, didn't know what to think. Logic, said the professor half to himself. Why don't they teach logic at these schools? There are only three possibilities. This was what I mentioned earlier. Either your sister is telling lies, or she is mad, or she is telling the truth. So this goes back to Lewis's liar, lunatic, or Lord that he specifically notes. I believe it was in Mere Christianity. He specifically notes that. You know she doesn't tell lies, and it is obvious that she is not mad. For the moment then, and unless any further evidence turns up, we must assume that she is telling the truth. Susan looked at him very hard and was quite sure from the expression on his face that he was not making fun of them. But how could this be true, sir? Why do you say that? Said the professor. Well, for one thing, if it was true, why doesn't everyone find this country every time they go to the wardrobe? I mean, there was nothing there when we looked. Even Lucy didn't pretend there was. And notice the professor. What has that to do with it? Well, sir, if things are real, then they are there all the time. Are they? So and this goes back to probably one of the verses I struggle with the most in life. And when I say struggle, it's comprehension. When it says that be hospitable, because in some ways, some of you have hosted angels. I often go, have we? How would one know? How would one know and experience that in the moment? And yet, this is kind of one of those concepts: are these things always real? Are people always people? Or are there angels who come in the form of people? And I'm just going straight from the scriptures on this. Maybe that was something that happened in the Old Testament, or something that happened mainly in the first century. We see that with angels and Paul and the rest. It's just one of those things I continue to have questions about. And I love that Lewis kind of sets this forth. It's like, why does it always have to be that way all the time? Couldn't it just be some of the time? And then Susan says, but there was no time. Lucy had no time to have gone anywhere, even if there was such a place. She came running after us the very moment we were out of the room. It was less than a minute, and she pretended to have been away for hours. And this is the part that the logic comes in. He goes, that is the very thing that makes her story so likely to be true. There's really a door in this house that leads to some other world. I should warn you that this is a very strange house, and even though I know very little about it. If I say she had gone into another world, I should not be surprised to find that the other world had a separate time of its own. So that however long you stand there would never take up any of your time. On the other hand, I don't think many girls of her age would invent that idea for themselves. If she had been pretending, she would have hidden for a reasonable time before coming out and telling her story. So here's the logic part of it, is how could she have invented such a thing in such a short amount of time? So here's dealing with the concept of time. But then on the other side, he's saying, but you're saying there was no time at all. How could she have created such a story in such a split-second moment of time, yet you don't believe that she might have been gone for a longer period of time to come up with such a thing? You see, a clever girl who was making up something might have stayed away for a long time to then make it seem that way. But do you really mean, sir, that there could be other worlds all over the place, just around the corner, like that? Nothing is more probable, said the professor. I wonder what they do teach them at these schools. Now, I do love this because for me, from a spiritual perspective, when you stop and think about the spiritual life of individuals and our own spiritual life, I do believe in a world beyond this one. Now, a magic wardrobe may seem far-fetched from this concept, but is it really when you think of the eternal nature of God and the eternal life with Jesus? Now, it would seem that that's only through death, but I can look at Old Testament and see Elisha, and I can see others who did not taste death. I can see moments in which this wouldn't have been the case, when it would have been different. And so I love that this is a pondering point, a philosophical point that he sets forth. Then he says, nothing is more probable than something beyond just what we experience right now. And as believers, we do believe that there is a world beyond this one. But what are we to do? My dear young lady, there's one plan which no one has yet suggested and which is well worth trying. And I do love this. What's that? We might all try minding our own business. Now, I just need to note this. Minding one's own business. What a novel approach to life. Oh, man, in a world where we spend so much time constantly meddling in others or meddling in others' perspectives or talking about others and talking about what other people are doing and the rest. And I'm fascinated by how often I get asked, well, what do you think about this? Or what do you think about this person? Or what do you think about them? And I can't tell you how I used to be about these things because I loved being in the know. I loved being in the know of all the different things that were going on. And I'll just be honest with you. I've gotten to a point now where I guess my own experiences in life have gotten to a point where people have misrepresented or missaid things, or even not necessarily meaning ill, but have stated things that then got changed or altered in some way. I'm just not interested in it anymore. I'm not interested in constantly being or having to know everything about everyone. But instead, the beauty of actually just living life and serving others and living life and doing the best that you can. I cannot control everyone's perception of me. I cannot control whether or not everybody will like me. I cannot control whether or not everybody will agree with me on things. But what I can do is focus on the people that I spend my time with. Predominantly for me, that's the college students and the young professionals. And it's people like you online and the rest. And I try to be honest and I try to be open and I try to be who I am. That's one of the things I would say, that when I'm speaking here, it's the same person as you would meet if I was preaching, if I was teaching, if you would find me in a class. minding one's own business is hard in a world that craves constant gossip, but it's doable. Not only is it doable, there is a quiet beauty to not having to constantly know everything about everyone or hearing the recent gossip or what this person said about this person, but instead to just love and support one. And one of the things I found is, let's say you see something on Facebook and recently you see it and you go, "Ooh, wow, something changed." Maybe their life altered in some way, and you heard a story and all of a sudden they're not connected to a spouse like they were before, things of that nature. That instead of just kind of speculating and finding and looking all around, instead you might just send a message, "Hey, praying for you. Don't know what's going on. I just want you to know that I love you. I appreciate you any way I can support you." In fact, I've found myself actually saying, "I don't need to know what's going on. I just want you to know that I'm praying for you and I wish you the best. If I can support you in any way, if you need an ear for somebody to listen to, that I'm here for you." But it's not about gathering information. In fact, most of the time I never hear from those people outside of just somebody saying, "Hey, thanks for your prayers," whatever it may be. But to truly engage those with the life around the ones that are around me, that's different. In my day-to-day life, I have students that come to me and want to share their struggles and things of that nature. And I do tell them all the time, I don't keep secrets. But I do promise that I will never tell anyone who doesn't need to know. There will be people at times who need to know, whether it's a counselor, or whether it's an elder, or whether it's someone along the way who needs support or where I think it's best. And I've often just said, "Trust me that I will do the best that I can with the information that you provide." But to just be a gossip is a problem. And to just constantly have to be in the know or be in control is also a problem. So they go on and says, "This house of the professors," they continue on. "People used to come and visit this house all the time to go to on guides and tours." And I grew up going to places like this. And so I could see it in my mind's eye what it would have been like. And Mrs. McCready, the housekeeper, had kind of told them that she does not want to be interrupted when she's giving these house tours. And so they're out one day, and just out of nowhere, they suddenly find themselves being kind of corralled into one of the rooms. And they find themselves hiding from Mrs. McCready and a group of people coming their direction. And finally, they sharps the word, and they all go into the room. And just when they get there, the sightseers are coming back up the stairs the wrong direction. And when they find themselves inside of a place, and I do love this line, this room where this wardrobe is. And after that, whether it was that they lost their heads or that Mrs. McCready was trying to catch them, or that some magic in the house had come to life and was chasing them into Narnia, they seemed to find themselves being followed everywhere until at last Susan said, "Oh, bother those trippers. Here, let's get into the wardrobe room till they've passed. No one will follow us in there." But the moment they were inside, they heard the voice in the passage, and then someone fumbling at the door. And then they saw the handle turning. "Quick," said Peter, "now there's nowhere else," and flung open the wardrobe. All four of them bundled inside and sat there panting in the dark. And as there was, I do love this, but he did not shut it. Of course, he remembered, a very sensible person does, that you should never, never shut yourself up in a wardrobe. This concept of wisdom is what I kind of want to leave us with tonight. And even that last little thing is a moment of wisdom. There's one thing to say, "Hey, don't shut yourself into a wardrobe." Well, the why? Well, Lewis wrote this over and over again for children because he didn't want them to do something that would be dangerous. Because he was creating a magical world that's based in a wardrobe, he also wanted to provide wisdom. There's parameters that need to be set. And so my encouragement for you tonight is to intentionally cultivate an appetite for wisdom, because wisdom offends your current understanding. My prayer is that tomorrow you will be a different person than you are today, that you will be a completely different person, and that you will wake up and thank God that you are not the same person that you were the day before. Now that's hard. That means a lot of introspection at times. It means being willing to acknowledge your own frailties and faults. But my hope is that you will intentionally cultivate an appetite for wisdom, because wisdom offends your current understanding. And this is something I wrote a while back that I just wanted to share. In fact, I posted on my wall just a little while ago. "It is my contention that the reason so many of us do not find spiritual depth is not because of sinful things, but because of morally neutral things that distract us. They aren't sinful in and of themselves, but they become such distractions that they never allow for the time needed for one to become spiritually deep. So sit down in a comfortable chair, pick up the Word of God, and dive into the deep end of the pool. Seek the wisdom of God." So the reason I wanted to share this again with you all is because this very notion of wisdom, beyond just knowledge, this concept of logic that he sets forth, of learning to ask what is true and what is not. So often we don't realize that Satan doesn't always just get you by getting you to stop going to church or by not listening necessarily in a sermon, but because he makes even what are good things, like family and friends, and even great nights out at the ballpark and doing fun things like that, can often be distractions away from what God wants from you. There is wisdom to be found in God's word. And that is the second part of my encouragement. My hope is that you are a different person tomorrow than you were today, but that you will also realize that there are morally neutral things in this life that can be just as distracting for your spiritual depth, for your wisdom, as the things that draw you away from God. And so maybe, just maybe, you might this week give up one of the things that you enjoy, one of the morally neutral things, and specifically alter that time or whatever you might be doing, and instead read the Word. Read the Bible. Sit down and read the Bible together with family or with friends or with someone to seek wisdom. In fact, pray for God's wisdom, not just that you might know more, but that you might understand. And that's not easy, but I promise you each and every day you will find more and more depth and more wisdom if you do these types of things. So that's the end of chapter 5. I'm so grateful for your presence tonight. I love you all. Any way I can support or help you out. As always, tell me where you're coming from in the chat. If you're watching this after the fact, if you're watching on YouTube or wherever it may be, or on Facebook, just know that if I can serve you in any way, I'm here for you. I hope you have a fantastic week. We will see you next Thursday night as we dive into chapter 6. Have a fantastic week.